So real quick with responders, non-responders, there was a really cool study that one of my faculty here, Mark Sarzinski, did. And he's worked really closely with Pennington Biomedical. But anyway, they have data and they were looking at the responder, non-responder issue. And basically what they concluded, and I think this was published in Nature a couple of years ago, there's no such thing. In other words, it depends on what you're measuring. So if you include enough outcomes, everybody was a responder, right? But when we're limiting it to one or two outcomes, it's like responder, non-responder. And then the other part of it too was non-responders go away if you simply train harder, right? So it may simply take more for them, but using the term responder, non-responder is probably disingenuous. Right. It just simply means it's sort of like easy gain, hard gain, you know, in terms of what you get, but then also looking at the right outcomes for them, because to your point about the genetics, there may be other things that people get out of it that just because that's not what we measured in the study doesn't mean it didn't occur.
Exactly. Cool.
Yeah. I feel like
that term too often. I'm sorry. That's why I brought it up. And
yeah, it's a great point.
It needed to be discussed. Yeah.
Right. The response, non-response, maybe it was the same paper, but it was cardiovascular training or aerobic training.
Right.
And some people responded to 1 to 2 days of training. Others required like 3 to 4 days of training to get the same response, but they still responded.
They responded.
That's right.
So, they're going to get benefit.
It must be frustrating for those who have to do it more times per week to get the same benefit.
It is. I really hope they enjoy it. So, you know, but I do think, so here's the other thing about that though, is that brings up an interesting issue when somebody's working with a trainer or a coach. And if they're only emphasizing a certain outcome, are you missing the boat on the other progress you're making, right? Because you need to have a more robust assessment in that case, or look at other sources of feedback. Because, so for example, and you guys know this well, I mean, you could train somebody and maybe they don't get a tremendous amount of fat loss from the exercise, but what if they're now able to run? Or what if they're now, you know, lifting twice as much as they were before? Is that not an outcome? Exactly. So again, identifying where the benefits are. And I think sometimes we miss that to be able to give feedback to people. And again, I think that we have to be careful not to also dismiss the value of an enjoyment factor. And it doesn't always necessarily mean especially for those of us that have been training a while, I can't honestly say that I go into lift and I'm like, oh my God, this is the most fun thing I've ever done. This is the best day of my life, right? But it's like, you feel good when it's done and you're doing it for a purpose to be able to do other things too. There's a functional component to it that, to be honest, in my 20s and 30s, I probably largely ignored. As you get older, you're like, man, I want to be able to ski better. I want to be able to bike. I want to be able to surf. And so now my training starts to revolve around being able to do those better, more like an athlete uses resistance training versus just lifting to lift.
Speaking of surfing, have you been out on the water?
No, not since my surgery. That's kind of the last frontier. And part of it was the timing with the weather. And then, you know, like last summer, you figure, I'm like, I'm not getting on a board with my chest still healing from getting split down the middle like a freaking lobster tail. So I think at this point, it's one of those where I would like to get out this summer and see how I'm feeling. But unfortunately, I have an arrhythmia that needs to get fixed. So I'm kind of debating whether I wait to get in the water until after that gets taken care of or not. But it doesn't bother me most times. But it kicked off while I was skiing in Aspen. I was in VTAC for 50 minutes. It was pretty scary. Yeah, I was stuck on the chairlift for part of it, and then I had to ski down the mountain, and then finally it reset. But yeah, that was fun. I've got the heart rate monitor data because I train with my heart rate monitor, and yeah, it's pretty crazy to watch the rapid onset and rapid offset of a PSVT. It's crazy.
That's gotta be scary as hell too. Holy geez.
Yeah, it is, especially when you're at altitude and you can't escape from that and you're trying to figure out how to get it under control. Yeah, my heart rate was between like 175 and 204 for like 50 minutes. And so that was not zone 2 training, by the way, guys. That was not zone 2 training.